I had always admired my grandparents' old, Victorian-style house. It stood atop a hill, overlooking a dense forest that had remained untouched for generations. The house itself was a relic of the past, with creaking floorboards and dimly lit rooms that seemed to hold secrets within their shadows. When my grandparents passed away, the house was left to me, their only grandchild. I moved in, hoping to find solace in the memories of my childhood visits. But what I uncovered was far from the warm nostalgia I had anticipated. On the first night, as I lay in my grandparents' room, I couldn't help but feel an eerie presence, as if I were being watched. Moonlight streamed through the lace curtains, casting unsettling patterns on the walls. As I drifted into a fitful sleep, I heard whispers, faint and incomprehensible, drifting through the room. The next morning, I decided to explore the house, hoping to shake off the uneasy feeling. In the attic, I stumbled upon a box of old journals, their pages yellowed with age. They belonged to my grandfather, who had always been a meticulous record keeper. As I read through the journals, I began to uncover a chilling tale, one of darkness, deceit, and a secret that had plagued my family for generations. My grandparents, it seemed, had been keepers of a malevolent entity, a being they had made a pact with long ago. According to my grandfather's entries, the entity granted immense wealth and power to our ancestors in exchange for a sinister favor, an annual sacrifice. Each year, the family had been bound to select a member, often a firstborn child, and offer them as a sacrifice to the entity. I couldn't believe what I was reading. It seemed like the ramblings of a madman, but the terror in my grandfather's words was palpable. He wrote of the agonizing guilt and remorse that had tormented him for decades, as he had been forced to make the unthinkable choice. Determined to unravel the truth, I delved deeper into the house's history. I discovered hidden compartments, secret passages, and a locked room in the basement. Inside that room, I found a collection of ancient tomes filled with dark incantations and rituals. As I read through the tomes, I realized that my ancestors had been attempting to break the cursed pact for generations. They had consulted with mediums, performed arcane rituals, and sought forbidden knowledge to no avail. The entity seemed to grow stronger with each passing year. The realization hit me like a tidal wave. My family had been living under the shadow of this malevolent force, forced to carry out unspeakable deeds to maintain their wealth and power. The guilt, shame, and fear had been passed down through the generations, a sinister legacy that I had inherited. Determined to break free from this cursed fate, I sought out the help of a local paranormal expert. Together, we embarked on a journey to confront the entity and sever the ties that bound my family to it. We performed rituals, recited incantations, and faced unspeakable horrors as we ventured deeper into the abyss. But the malevolent entity was relentless, and it fought back with a fury I couldn't have imagined. It manifested as shadowy figures, tormented spirits, and haunting visions that threatened to drive us to madness. The house itself seemed to come alive, its walls closing in on us, its floors shifting beneath our feet. As the battle raged on, I couldn't help but feel the weight of my ancestors' sins pressing down on me. The entity knew my vulnerabilities, my deepest fears, and it used them against me. It whispered promises of power and wealth, tempting me to succumb to its dark desires. But I refused to give in. With the guidance of the paranormal expert, we performed a final, desperate ritual to banish the entity once and for all. It was a harrowing experience, one that pushed us to the brink of our sanity. In the end, we were victorious. The entity was banished, and the curse that had plagued my family for generations was broken. But the cost was high, my sanity was fractured, and the weight of the sins of my ancestors would forever haunt my conscience. As I sit in the old, Victorian-style house, the one that had once held so many cherished memories, I can't help but wonder if the malevolent entity is truly gone or if it's merely biding its time, waiting for the next generation to bear the burden of its curse. Growing up, I always had a special bond with my grandparents. They lived in an old, creaky house on the outskirts of town, a place that had been in our family for generations. It was a charming old place, filled with antique furniture, dusty old books, and the scent of memories from years gone by. But beneath its quaint exterior, there lurked a dark secret, one that would change my life forever. It was a warm summer's day when I received a call from my parents, informing me that my beloved grandfather had passed away in his sleep. I was devastated, but I knew I had to return to my childhood home to be there for my grandmother during this difficult time. As I walked through the front door of the familiar old house, I was overcome with a sense of nostalgia. The memories of my childhood came rushing back, and I couldn't help but smile through my tears. My grandmother, a frail but strong-willed woman, greeted me with a tight hug and tearful eyes. We spent the first few days reminiscing about my grandfather, sharing stories, and going through old family photo albums. It was during one of those evenings, as we sat in the dimly lit living room, that my grandmother began to open up about a secret that had been haunting her for decades. "Darling," she said, her voice trembling, "there's something I need to tell you. Something your grandfather and I swore to take to our graves." I looked at her, intrigued and slightly apprehensive. "What is it, Grandma?" She took a deep breath, her wrinkled hands trembling as she spoke. "This house, this land, it's cursed, my dear. It's been in our family for generations, but with it comes a darkness, a terrible secret." I leaned in closer, my curiosity piqued. "What kind of secret, Grandma?" She began to recount a chilling tale, a story that had been passed down through the generations. According to her, our ancestors had been involved in something sinister, a pact with a malevolent force that granted them immense wealth and power. In exchange, they were bound to a terrible curse, one that plagued their lives and the lives of their descendants. As she spoke, I couldn't help but feel a shiver run down my spine. It sounded like a far-fetched ghost story, but the fear in my grandmother's eyes was all too real. "They say that every firstborn child in our family is marked," she continued. "Marked by the curse. Your grandfather and I tried to protect you, to shield you from the darkness that looms over this place. But now that he's gone, I fear that the curse will come for you." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. It sounded like a macabre fairy tale, and yet, there was something about the way my grandmother spoke, a deep-seated fear that tugged at my heart. Over the next few weeks, strange things began to happen in the house. I would hear whispers in the dead of night, voices that seemed to call out to me from the shadows. Objects would move on their own, and I would wake up to find strange symbols etched into the walls. I tried to dismiss it as grief-induced paranoia, but the feeling of being watched never left me. One night, as I lay in bed, I heard a soft, eerie melody echoing through the house. It was the same lullaby my grandmother used to sing to me as a child. Following the haunting melody, I found myself drawn to the attic, a place I had always been told to stay away from. The attic door creaked open as if inviting me in. Inside, I discovered a room filled with old journals, dusty tomes, and a collection of ominous artifacts. As I read through the journals, I realized that my ancestors had been trying to undo the curse for generations. They had performed rituals, sought out dark magic, and made countless sacrifices, all in vain. The curse seemed to grow stronger with each passing generation. Terrified and desperate for answers, I confronted my grandmother with my findings. She confessed that she had known about the attic and the curse all along. She had hoped to protect me by keeping me in the dark, but now it was too late. We decided to seek the help of a local paranormal investigator, a man who had experience with malevolent forces. He arrived at our doorstep with a sense of grim determination, armed with an array of supernatural tools and knowledge. Together, we embarked on a journey to uncover the truth and break the curse that had haunted my family for generations. As we delved deeper into the darkness, we faced horrors beyond imagination, including vengeful spirits, restless souls, and a malevolent force determined to keep its grip on our family. I wish I could say that we succeeded in breaking the curse, that we emerged victorious against the malevolent force that had plagued my family for so long. But the truth is, some secrets are meant to remain buried, and some curses are too powerful to be undone. As I stand here today, haunted by the memories of that fateful summer, I can't help but wonder if the curse still lingers, waiting for the next generation to bear its terrible burden. My grandmother may have passed away, but her warning continues to echo in my mind, a chilling reminder that some secrets are better left untouched. As I drove through the dimly lit streets of the quiet suburban neighborhood, I couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. It was a chilly October evening, and the leaves rustled ominously in the gentle breeze. My destination was a remote house at the edge of town, and it felt like I was navigating through a maze of darkness. I was a pizza delivery guy, and my shift had extended late into the night due to a sudden rush of orders. The delivery instructions for this particular order had been rather peculiar: leave the pizza by the front door, ring the bell, and wait. I'd seen my fair share of odd delivery requests, but this one had an eerie undertone. The house in question loomed ahead, a decrepit mansion that appeared to have seen better days. Its windows were boarded up, and the paint had long since faded. The front yard was overgrown with tangled weeds, and the garden gnomes that adorned the lawn looked more like sinister sentinels in the moonlight. I parked my car by the curb, the engine idling softly. Clutching the pizza box, I made my way to the front door, my footsteps echoing in the silence. As I approached the door, I noticed the air was filled with an unsettling stillness, and I couldn't help but feel like an intruder in this desolate place. Following the instructions, I placed the pizza on the doorstep and rang the bell. A heavy sense of dread washed over me, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I nervously glanced around, but there was no sign of life in the vicinity. Just as I was about to leave, the door creaked open slowly, revealing only darkness beyond. My heart raced as I strained to see inside, but there was no one there. A shiver ran down my spine as I considered the possibility of a prank. "Hello?" I called out tentatively, my voice barely above a whisper. "Your pizza's here." There was no response, only an eerie silence that hung in the air like a heavy veil. I considered leaving the pizza and making a swift exit, but something compelled me to step inside. Maybe it was the promise of a generous tip or the nagging curiosity to uncover the mystery behind the strange delivery. I cautiously crossed the threshold, my footsteps echoing through the dimly lit foyer. The interior of the house was as dilapidated as the exterior, covered in layers of dust and cobwebs. Antique furniture lay draped in dusty sheets, and the walls were adorned with fading portraits of long-forgotten faces. As I ventured further into the house, an unsettling sensation washed over me, a feeling of being watched by unseen eyes. I quickened my pace, searching for any sign of the pizza's intended recipient. The trail of my footsteps seemed to disappear into the darkness, leaving me disoriented and uneasy. Suddenly, a faint whisper echoed through the silence, "Down here." The voice was faint but unmistakable, coming from the direction of the basement. My heart pounding in my chest, I cautiously descended the creaking wooden stairs, my footsteps reverberating like a funeral dirge. The basement was a chilling sight, a dimly lit chamber filled with rows of old wooden crates and discarded relics. At the far end of the room, I spotted a figure standing in the shadows, their face obscured. "Is that you?" I asked, my voice trembling. The figure nodded slowly, beckoning me closer. As I approached, I could make out more details, a tattered, hooded cloak and skeletal fingers that gripped the edge of a table. In front of the figure lay the pizza box I had delivered. I took a step closer, my heart in my throat. "Are you going to pay for the pizza?" The figure slowly raised its head, revealing a grotesque visage, a skull-like face with empty eye sockets that seemed to glow with an eerie, otherworldly light. I stumbled back in horror, realizing that I was not in the presence of a living being but something far more sinister. A bone-chilling laughter emanated from the figure as it extended its bony hand toward me, revealing a handful of tarnished coins. "Payment," it hissed, its voice a haunting whisper. Without a second thought, I snatched the coins from its skeletal hand and fled the basement, leaving the pizza behind. As I emerged into the cool night air, I couldn't help but glance back at the sinister house, vowing never to return. I drove away from that eerie place, my heart still racing, and the sinister laughter echoing in my ears. I couldn't explain what I had witnessed, but one thing was certain: I would never forget the night I delivered a pizza to a house of horrors. As the rain lashed against my windshield, I navigated the winding road that led to the remote cabin. I had received an order for pizza delivery, but the delivery instructions were unlike any I had seen before. Bring the pizza to the abandoned cabin in the woods. Knock 3 times and wait. It was a dark and stormy night, with ominous clouds obscuring the moon. The forest around me seemed to close in, and the wind whispered eerie secrets through the rustling leaves. The cabin was said to be cursed, a place where strange occurrences had been reported for decades. I couldn't help but shiver as I approached the ominous structure. The cabin was a decrepit, rotting relic of a bygone era, its windows shattered, and its wooden planks warped with age. Moss and ivy clung to the walls, giving it an eerie, overgrown appearance. I parked my car in front of the cabin, my headlights cutting through the darkness. Clutching the pizza box tightly, I stepped out of the car and made my way to the cabin's front door. The air was thick with an unsettling stillness, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched by unseen eyes. I knocked 3 times, my knuckles rapping against the decaying wood. For a moment, there was only silence, and I began to doubt if anyone was there at all. Just as I turned to leave, the door creaked open slowly, revealing only darkness beyond. A shiver ran down my spine as I peered into the inky blackness. "Hello?" I called out, my voice quivering. "Pizza delivery." Suddenly, a cold, bony hand emerged from the darkness, its fingers gnarled and skeletal. It gripped the edge of the door and pulled it open further, revealing a dimly lit interior. I hesitated for a moment, fear gnawing at my insides, but something compelled me to step inside. The narrow corridor of the cabin was lined with flickering candles that cast eerie, dancing shadows on the walls. The air was heavy with the scent of damp wood and something far more sinister. As I ventured deeper into the cabin, I noticed peculiar symbols etched into the wooden floor, glowing with an unnatural, pulsating light. The walls were adorned with faded photographs of people long gone, their eyes seeming to follow my every move. A voice echoed from the darkness, a soft, melodic whisper. "Welcome, traveler." I turned to see a cloaked figure standing before me, their face concealed by the hood of their robe. They extended a bony hand toward me, and I noticed that they held a bag of tarnished, ancient coins. "Payment," the figure whispered, its voice a haunting melody. Without a second thought, I accepted the bag of coins and hastily retreated from the cabin, leaving the pizza behind. As I stepped back out into the stormy night, the cabin's door creaked shut behind me, and the candles within flickered out. I returned to my car, my heart pounding, and drove away from the cursed cabin, vowing never to return. As I glanced at the bag of coins in my hand, I couldn't help but wonder about the strange figure and the eerie events that had unfolded. Little did I know that the coins I had accepted were not of this world, and the cabin's curse would forever be a part of me, haunting my every step and plunging me into a darkness from which there was no escape. The night was exceptionally dark, even for the remote mountain road I was navigating. I was on a pizza delivery run, my headlights cutting through the inky blackness like a lone ship in an endless sea. The wind howled through the dense forest, and the trees seemed to lean in, as if conspiring secrets. The order I had received was unusual, to say the least: deliver the pizza to the old, abandoned church deep in the woods. Knock on the door 3 times and wait. It was a request that sent shivers down my spine, but I needed the money, and my curiosity got the better of me. The church in question was the stuff of local legends. It had been abandoned for decades, ever since a series of mysterious disappearances had occurred in the area. The townsfolk spoke of eerie chants and strange lights emanating from the church at night. As I approached the ominous structure, I couldn't help but feel a growing sense of unease. The church was a decrepit, rotting relic, its once stalwart walls now crumbling with age. Ivy and thorns had claimed the structure, giving it a foreboding, overgrown appearance. Moonlight filtered through the gnarled branches overhead, casting eerie shadows that danced upon the church's facade. I parked my car in front of the church, the engine sputtering to a halt. Clutching the pizza box, I stepped out into the frigid night. The air was thick with an unsettling stillness, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched by unseen eyes. Summoning my courage, I approached the church's imposing wooden door and knocked 3 times, each rap echoing through the silence like a death knell. For a moment, there was only silence, and I wondered if I had made a grave mistake. Just as I turned to leave, the massive door creaked open slowly, revealing only darkness beyond. My heart pounded in my chest as I peered into the abyss. "Hello?" I called out, my voice barely above a whisper. "Pizza delivery." There was no response, only an eerie silence that hung in the air like a heavy veil. With trembling hands, I stepped inside, the dim light from my flashlight revealing rows of decaying pews and an altar shrouded in shadows. The air inside was heavy with the scent of aged wood and something far more ominous. As I ventured further into the church, my footsteps seemed to reverberate through the silence, each sound echoing like a haunting refrain. Suddenly, a voice echoed from the darkness, a soft, chilling whisper. "You've come." I turned to see a cloaked figure standing at the altar, their face concealed by the hood of their robe. They extended a skeletal hand toward me, and I noticed that they held a bag of tarnished, ancient coins. "Payment," the figure whispered, its voice sending shivers down my spine. Without a second thought, I accepted the bag of coins and made a hasty exit from the church, leaving the pizza behind. As I stepped back out into the night, the massive door creaked shut behind me, sealing the church's secrets once more. I returned to my car, my heart still racing, and drove away from the cursed church. As I glanced at the bag of coins in my hand, I couldn't help but wonder about the mysterious figure and the eerie events that had unfolded. Little did I know that the coins I had accepted were not of this world, and the church's curse would forever be a part of me, leading me down a path of darkness and despair from which there was no escape. I've always considered myself an ordinary person leading an ordinary life. I work a regular 9-to-5 job, have a small circle of friends, and enjoy quiet evenings at home. But everything changed when I began to feel like I was being watched. It started subtly, a sense of unease that gnawed at me during everyday activities. One evening, as I was walking back to my apartment after work, I couldn't shake the feeling of eyes on me. I glanced around, but the bustling city street was filled with people going about their business. I brushed it off as paranoia and continued on my way. But the sensation persisted, like a shadow that refused to be shaken. I began to notice strange occurrences, subtle things at first, like a book on my shelf that had been moved or the feeling of a presence just beyond my peripheral vision. I confided in my closest friend, Sarah, about my growing unease. She assured me it was all in my head, a result of stress or fatigue. But I knew it was more than that. There was an undeniable feeling that someone was watching my every move. One night, as I lay in bed, I heard a faint tapping sound at my window. My heart raced as I mustered the courage to investigate. I pulled back the curtain slowly, revealing nothing but the dark expanse of the city outside. I breathed a sigh of relief but couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been there. The next morning, I found a note slipped under my apartment door. It was a simple message, typed on plain white paper: "I'm always watching." Panic gripped me, and I immediately called the police. They promised to look into it but warned me that without concrete evidence, there was little they could do. As the days turned into weeks, the stalking continued. I found more notes, each one more unsettling than the last. They were always brief, always ominous, and always left in places where I couldn't possibly know who had put them there. The feeling of being watched became an inescapable nightmare. I installed security cameras around my apartment, hoping to catch a glimpse of my tormentor. But the footage was always the same, endless hours of nothingness, only to be interrupted by the inexplicable sound of my own voice muttering in my sleep. It was as though someone had been in my apartment, watching me as I slept. I became a prisoner in my own home, afraid to go out, afraid to sleep. I confided in Sarah again, and she insisted I stay with her until the police could identify the stalker. I agreed, hoping that being in a different environment would ease my anxiety. But even at Sarah's apartment, I couldn't escape the feeling of being watched. I would wake in the middle of the night, convinced that someone was lurking in the shadows. I'd hear faint whispers just beyond the door, but when I checked, there was no one there. One night, as I lay awake in bed, I heard a soft voice coming from the hallway. It was barely audible, but I could make out the words. "I told you. Always watching." My heart pounded in my chest as I realized the voice was mine. I confronted Sarah, convinced that she was behind the torment. But she vehemently denied any involvement, and the fear in her eyes was genuine. I believed her, and that's when it hit me: I had been hearing my own voice all along. I returned to my apartment, desperate for answers. I searched every inch of the place, determined to uncover the source of my torment. That's when I found it, a small hidden microphone tucked away in the corner of my living room. I removed the device, and with trembling hands, I played back the recordings. It was my voice, my laughter, my conversations with friends and family. The stalker had been listening to every word, every moment of my life. I reported my discovery to the police, and they traced the microphone's signal to an abandoned building nearby. When they entered the building, they found a room filled with monitors and recording equipment. It was a surveillance hub, a shrine dedicated to me. But there was no sign of the stalker. No one knew who had been watching me, who had invaded my life and left me in a constant state of fear. As time passed, the stalking ceased, and life returned to a semblance of normalcy. But I could never shake the feeling of being watched, the fear that someone was always lurking just out of sight. I learned to live with the paranoia, to accept that my life would never be the same. And I vowed to be vigilant, to protect myself from ever becoming a victim again. I never believed in ghosts or the supernatural until that fateful night when I became the target of a relentless stalker. It was a cold and dreary evening, and I had just returned home from a long day at work. Little did I know that the true horrors of my life were about to unfold. As I settled into my cozy living room, I heard the faintest sound, a soft whisper that sent a shiver down my spine. I dismissed it as a figment of my imagination and blamed my tiredness. But the whisper persisted, growing louder with each passing moment. I searched every corner of my apartment, but there was no one there. The voice seemed to be coming from within the walls themselves. I thought I was losing my mind. Night after night, the haunting whispers continued, growing more malevolent with each passing day. It was as if an unseen presence had invaded my home, tormenting me with its insidious words. I couldn't escape the feeling of being watched, even in the safety of my own bedroom. I confided in my best friend, Lily, about the unnerving events unfolding in my life. She suggested I stay with her for a while to escape the malevolent presence. I agreed, hoping that a change of environment would bring relief. But even at Lily's house, the haunting whispers followed me. I would hear them in the dead of night, echoing through the darkened corridors of her home. Lily was worried about my deteriorating mental state, but I knew it wasn't me. It was the relentless stalker. One night, as I lay in Lily's guest room, I heard the voice again. It was a sinister, raspy whisper, filled with malice. "I see you," it hissed. Panic surged through me as I realized the stalker wasn't just haunting my apartment, it was haunting me. Lily called the police, and they conducted a thorough search of her house. But they found nothing, no hidden speakers, no electronic devices, nothing that could explain the sinister whispers. They assured us that it was all in my head, a manifestation of stress and anxiety. Desperate for answers, I reached out to a paranormal investigator named Dr. Samuel Kane. He specialized in cases of unexplained phenomena and claimed to have encountered malevolent entities before. When I told him about the relentless stalking and haunting whispers, he agreed to help. Dr. Kane set up his equipment in Lily's house and conducted a series of tests. He asked me to describe the voice and the sensations I experienced. I could see the concern in his eyes as he listened to my account. After hours of investigation, Dr. Kane finally made a chilling revelation. He explained that the whispers were not coming from any electronic device or hidden speaker. They were supernatural in origin. An entity from the other side was tormenting me. As he delved deeper into his research drive, Kane uncovered a dark history surrounding Lily's house. It had once belonged to a reclusive family with a tragic past. Legend had it that the family's youngest daughter had died under mysterious circumstances, and her restless spirit was said to haunt the house. Dr. Kane believed that the malevolent entity was the vengeful spirit of the deceased girl, lashing out at anyone who dared to enter her domain. He explained that I had unknowingly become a target of her wrath. Desperate for a solution, Dr. Kane conducted a spiritual cleansing of the house, hoping to appease the vengeful spirit and put an end to the haunting. As he performed the ritual, I could feel a heavy presence in the room, as if the very air had turned oppressive. With each incantation, the room grew colder, and I heard the whispering voice one last time, pleading and sorrowful. "Let me go," it begged. Dr. Kane continued the ritual, and with a final, resounding chant, the oppressive presence dissipated, leaving behind an eerie silence. The haunting whispers were finally gone, and I could breathe a sigh of relief. Dr. Kane assured us that the vengeful spirit had been released from its torment, finding peace at last. I thanked him for his help, and he left, leaving Lily and me to recover from the terrifying ordeal. Though the haunting had ended, the memories of that relentless stalker would stay with me forever. I had come face to face with the supernatural, and it was a chilling experience that had changed my perception of the world forever. My name is Emily, and I never thought I'd be telling a story like this. I was always the practical type, grounded in reality. But sometimes, reality can take a chilling turn. It all began when I moved to a quaint little town for a fresh start. The kind of place where everyone knows each other's names, and the biggest news is a new bakery opening on Main Street. It seemed perfect, peaceful and serene. I rented a cozy cottage at the edge of town, surrounded by towering trees that rustled with secrets. The first few weeks were blissfully quiet. But then, I started noticing something odd. It was subtle at first, a feeling of being watched. I'd be in my garden, tending to the roses, when I'd get the eerie sensation of unseen eyes on me. I'd glance around, but the solitude of the woods was the only witness to my unease. As days turned into weeks, the feeling persisted, growing stronger with each passing day. I'd hear whispers, faint and unintelligible, on the wind. I'd find my garden tools moved, the soil disturbed as if someone had been digging. I thought it was just my imagination playing tricks on me, so I tried to ignore it. But then, things took a sinister turn. Late at night, I'd hear the sound of footsteps outside my window. When I peered out, there was no one there, just the inky darkness of the forest. I decided to confide in my neighbor, Mrs. Turner, hoping she'd offer some insight. She was an elderly woman, wise and kind. But when I mentioned my strange experiences, her face paled. "You might be dealing with the Watcher," she said in a hushed voice. "The Watcher? What do you mean?" I asked, my heart pounding. Mrs. Turner explained that for generations, there had been rumors of a mysterious entity known as the Watcher. It was said to be a spirit or creature that observed the lives of those in the town, never revealing itself but leaving an eerie trail of its presence. She warned me not to engage with it, to ignore its whispers and strange occurrences. But that was easier said than done. The Watcher's presence in my life became more invasive. It began sending letters, creepy, handwritten notes that would appear on my doorstep in the dead of night. The messages were cryptic, filled with unsettling phrases like, "I see you, and you can't hide." I contacted the local authorities, but they were as baffled as I was. There was no evidence, no trace of anyone physically stalking me. I felt like I was losing my mind, trapped in a nightmare that had no explanation. One evening, as I sat by the fireplace, trying to find solace in a book, I heard a voice. It was faint but distinct, a whisper that seemed to come from within the very walls of my cottage. "Emily, come outside," it beckoned. My heart raced as I realized that the voice wasn't just in my head, it was real. With trembling hands, I grabbed a flashlight and cautiously stepped onto my porch. The night was shrouded in darkness, the moon hidden behind thick clouds. But as I scanned the trees, I saw it, a figure standing at the edge of the forest, barely visible in the dim light. My breath caught in my throat. It was tall and shadowy, its features indistinct. But its eyes, glowing orbs that seemed to pierce through the night, were fixed on me. I wanted to run, to scream, but fear rooted me in place. The Watcher took a step closer, and I could feel its presence like a weight on my chest. "Emily," it whispered again, its voice echoing in my mind. "Come to me." I didn't know what compelled me to move, but my body began to walk toward the creature against my will. Step by step, I approached the edge of the forest, my flashlight trembling in my grip. As I stood before the Watcher, its eyes bore into mine. It raised a shadowy hand and touched my forehead, sending a jolt of ice-cold dread through my body. I felt as though I was being stripped bare, my thoughts and memories laid bare before this enigmatic entity. Then, as suddenly as it had appeared, the Watcher retreated into the depths of the forest, disappearing into the night. I was left standing there, trembling and disoriented. In the days that followed, the Watcher's presence faded. The letters stopped, the footsteps ceased, and the whispers vanished. It was as if the entity had satisfied its curiosity and moved on to its next victim. I never truly understood the nature of the Watcher, whether it was a supernatural being or something else entirely. All I knew was that it had invaded my life, leaving behind a chilling trail of fear and uncertainty. I moved away from that town, leaving the cottage and the Watcher behind. But the memory of that encounter still haunts me, a reminder that in the quietest of places, the most unsettling secrets can lurk in the shadows. I've always been a dog person. Growing up, my family had a beloved golden retriever named Max, and he was my faithful companion throughout my childhood. So, when I moved into an old, creaky house in the countryside, it was only natural that I adopted a dog of my own, a Labrador mix I named Luna. The house itself was a charming relic of the past, nestled amidst acres of lush forest. It had a certain timeless quality, and I immediately fell in love with its rustic charm. But as the days turned into weeks, I began to notice something odd about Luna. At first, it was subtle, a hesitation before entering certain rooms, a low growl at empty corners, and her eyes fixed on something unseen. I dismissed it as typical dog behavior, attributing it to her adjusting to the new environment. But as time passed, her behavior grew increasingly strange. One night, I was awoken by Luna's frantic barking. I stumbled out of bed and followed her to the living room, where she stood, hackles raised, staring at the fireplace. It was an old, grandiose fireplace with a large mirror hanging above it. Luna's reflection was distorted in the antique glass, her eyes wide with terror. I tried to calm her down, assuming she'd seen a squirrel or a passing deer, but her fear was palpable. She refused to go near the fireplace and spent the night whimpering by my side. In the days that followed, Luna's unease only intensified. She'd often growl at empty spaces, her eyes tracking invisible movements across the room. I began to feel a creeping sense of unease, as if we were not alone in that old house. One evening, while I was reading in the living room, Luna suddenly bolted from her spot by the window and raced to the basement door. She scratched at it, whining as if something inside was calling to her. I reluctantly opened the door and followed her down the creaky stairs. The basement was cold and dimly lit, the air heavy with a musty odor. Luna led me to a corner, where she began digging at the dirt floor with wild determination. My heart raced as I watched her, wondering what could have possessed her to act this way. With every scoop of dirt she tossed aside, my anxiety grew. It was then that I noticed a strange, unearthly glow emanating from beneath the dirt. Luna's digging revealed a wooden box, weathered with age and covered in strange symbols. I carefully lifted the box from its burial place, my fingers trembling with a mixture of fear and curiosity. When I opened it, my blood ran cold. Inside, there was a collection of old photographs, yellowed with age, showing people I had never seen before. As I examined the photographs, I realized they all had something in common. They featured the same imposing fireplace with the antique mirror. In each photo, different families stood before the fireplace, their faces etched with fear and desperation. It was as if the fireplace had been witness to generations of fear and dread, capturing the haunting moments of those who had lived in that house before me. Luna's behavior suddenly made sense. She had sensed the presence of something beyond the veil of our reality. As night fell, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. I locked the basement door and retreated to my bedroom with Luna. But there was no escaping the sense of dread that had settled over the house like a shroud. The nights grew longer, and Luna's agitation became unbearable. She'd bark and growl at the fireplace, her eyes fixed on her distorted reflection in the antique mirror. I couldn't deny it any longer. There was something in that mirror, something malevolent. One evening, as I gazed into the mirror, I saw it, a shadowy figure, a twisted, contorted face that seemed to scream silently. I recoiled in horror, my heart pounding in my chest. Luna barked furiously at the mirror, her hackles raised, as if challenging the entity within. Desperate for answers, I began researching the history of the house, hoping to uncover the secrets that lay hidden within its walls. It didn't take long to discover the truth. The house had once belonged to a family that had suffered a tragic loss. Their young daughter, Amelia, had drowned in a nearby river, and her spirit was said to be restless, unable to move on. The family had resorted to desperate measures, believing that sealing Amelia's spirit within the mirror above the fireplace would bring them solace. But the mirror had become a prison, trapping not only Amelia's spirit but also the souls of those who had tried to help her cross over. The entity that Luna and I had encountered was a malevolent force, the collective pain and suffering of generations. Terrified, I knew I had to break the cycle. With Luna by my side, I removed the mirror from above the fireplace and, following an old ritual I had found, shattered it into 1,000 pieces. As the glass shattered, a cold wind rushed through the room, carrying with it the anguished cries of the trapped souls. Luna and I watched as the shattered pieces of the mirror dissolved into the air, disappearing like smoke. The malevolent force was gone, and the house finally felt at peace. In the weeks that followed, Luna's behavior returned to normal, and the old house lost its eerie atmosphere. We had confronted the paranormal, and in doing so, we had set free the tormented souls trapped within the mirror. Now, as I sit in my cozy living room by the fireplace, Luna rests peacefully at my feet. The house that was once haunted has become a home once more, filled with warmth and love. As I look at Luna, I'm reminded that even in the face of the supernatural, the bond between a person and their dog can conquer the darkest of forces. I've always been drawn to the peculiar and unexplained. So, when I stumbled upon an old, decrepit mansion in the heart of the countryside, I couldn't resist the urge to explore it. Little did I know that this decision would lead me into a world of chilling mysteries and paranormal phenomena. The mansion stood tall, its once grand facade now crumbling with age. Ivy crawled up its walls like twisted veins, and the air around it carried a heavy, foreboding presence. It was as if the house itself was reluctant to reveal its secrets. I had always believed that dogs possessed a unique sensitivity to the supernatural, and my loyal German Shepherd, Rex, was no exception. He had an uncanny ability to sense things that were beyond my comprehension. As I pushed open the mansion's creaking front door, Rex followed, his ears perked and his nose twitching. The interior was as haunting as the exterior. Dusty, cobweb-covered furniture lay shrouded in darkness, and the air was thick with an otherworldly chill. The only source of light came from the dim rays of the setting sun, which filtered through broken windows like ghostly apparitions. Rex and I cautiously ventured further into the mansion, our footsteps echoing eerily in the silence. It was then that we heard it, a faint, mournful howling that seemed to come from deep within the house. Rex's hackles rose, and he let out a low growl. As we followed the haunting sound, we entered a room unlike any other. The walls were adorned with faded portraits of people who had long since passed into the annals of history. But it was the large, ornate mirror at the far end of the room that drew our attention. Rex approached the mirror tentatively, his reflection warping and distorting as he drew nearer. I watched in awe as his image seemed to merge with that of a spectral figure, an ethereal, translucent woman with sorrowful eyes. The woman's mournful howling grew louder, filling the room with an unsettling melancholy. It was then that I realized she was not alone. Other ghostly figures began to materialize around us, their features twisted in anguish. I tried to speak, to ask them who they were and why they were trapped here, but my words fell on deaf ears. The spectral figures seemed trapped in an eternal loop of torment, unable to communicate their pain. Rex, however, seemed to understand. He began to whine softly, his gaze locked on the mirror. It was as if he could hear their silent cries for help, a testament to the extraordinary bond between humans and their canine companions. Determined to uncover the truth, I scoured the mansion's library for any clues about its history. It was there that I stumbled upon a dusty, leather-bound journal, its pages filled with the ramblings of a tormented soul. The journal told the tale of a woman named Eliza, who had once lived in the mansion during the 19th century. She had been deeply in love with a man named Samuel, but their love had been forbidden by her overbearing father. In a fit of desperation, Eliza had turned to dark rituals in a desperate bid to be with Samuel. The ritual had gone horribly wrong, binding her soul and the souls of those who had attempted to save her to the mirror in the room where we now stood. They were condemned to an eternity of anguish, unable to move on to the afterlife. I knew I had to free them, but the task seemed insurmountable. The journal spoke of a complex ritual involving candles, incantations, and a rare crystal that was now lost to time. It was a daunting prospect, but I was determined to try. Over the course of several weeks, I scoured antique shops and consulted experts in the occult, piecing together the necessary components for the ritual. Rex remained my constant companion, his loyalty unwavering as we delved deeper into the paranormal. Finally, the night of the ritual arrived. The moon hung high in the sky, casting an eerie glow through the mansion's broken windows. Rex and I stood before the haunted mirror, the spectral figures watching us with bated breath. As I began the incantation, a palpable energy filled the room, and the spectral figures started to wail in agony. I pushed forward, determined to break the curse that had held them captive for so long. With the final words of the incantation, I placed the rare crystal before the mirror, and a blinding light filled the room. The spectral figures let out one last, mournful cry before they were consumed by the light, disappearing into the ether. When the light finally dissipated, Rex and I were left standing alone in the room. The mirror was now clear, its surface unblemished by the tormented souls that had once been trapped within it. Rex and I had succeeded in freeing them, but the experience had left an indelible mark on both of us. We had ventured into the realm of the paranormal and emerged forever changed. As we left the mansion behind, I couldn't help but feel a sense of closure. The spirits that had haunted those old walls were finally at peace, and Rex and I had played a part in their redemption. Our bond had grown stronger through our shared ordeal, a testament to the unbreakable connection between a person and their dog. My name is Sarah and I used to deliver pizzas for Tony's Pizzeria. It was just another ordinary evening when I received an order that would change my life forever. Little did I know I was about to step into the heart of darkness. It was a Friday night, and the rain was pouring down in torrents. I was already soaked when I arrived at the Harrison House, a towering, Victorian-era mansion perched atop a hill. The place had a sinister reputation in our town, but I wasn't superstitious. I was just here to deliver a large pepperoni with extra cheese. As I climbed the creaky steps to the front door, a feeling of unease washed over me. The house loomed over me like a sleeping giant, and the windows were like vacant eyes staring into my soul. I knocked on the massive wooden door, and it swung open with an eerie creak. No one was there to greet me, but I could hear faint whispers echoing through the halls. Ignoring my instincts, I stepped inside. The foyer was dimly lit, adorned with dusty chandeliers and faded portraits of stern-faced individuals. The air was thick with an unpleasant, musty odor that clung to my clothes. I followed the soft murmurs, my footsteps echoing in the eerie silence. The voices led me to a grand dining room, where a long, oak table was set for a feast. Candles flickered on the table, casting dancing shadows on the walls. At the head of the table sat a man, or what was left of him. His skin was pallid, and his eyes were hollow sockets, devoid of life. Yet he spoke to me, his voice a haunting whisper. "You're here for the pizza, aren't you?" I nodded, my voice caught in my throat. He motioned for me to sit at the opposite end of the table. "Join me," he said, his bony fingers gesturing toward the empty chair. I hesitated for a moment before cautiously taking a seat. As I looked around, I noticed the other guests at the table, ghostly figures in tattered Victorian attire. They stared at me with empty eyes, their faces frozen in perpetual sorrow. The man spoke again, his voice quivering with sadness. "We have been waiting for so long, trapped in this wretched place. We can never leave." I glanced at the pizza box, my appetite suddenly gone. "I should be going," I stammered. But the man's spectral hand shot out, grabbing my wrist with a strength that defied his ethereal form. "You can't leave. Not until you hear our story." With an unseen force, he compelled me to listen. And as he spoke, the room faded away, replaced by a vivid vision of the past. I saw the Harrison family, once wealthy and powerful, gathered around the very table we sat at. Their faces were filled with joy as they feasted on a grand meal. But their happiness was short-lived. A terrible plague had struck the town, and one by one the family members fell ill. They watched helplessly as their loved ones succumbed to the disease, their cries for mercy unanswered. In a fit of desperation, they made a pact with dark forces, sacrificing their souls for a chance at immortality. The ritual transformed them into the wretched beings I now saw before me. The man's story ended, and the room returned to its eerie reality. The ghostly figures at the table stared at me, their eyes filled with longing and regret. "You must help us," the man pleaded, his voice a whisper in the darkness. "We are trapped here, cursed to relive our sins for all eternity. Release us from this torment." I didn't know how, but I couldn't leave them to suffer. With a heavy heart, I took out my phone and dialed the local priest. He arrived at the Harrison house, and together we performed a powerful exorcism. The spirits screamed and writhed in agony as they were banished from the mortal realm. With one final, mournful cry, they vanished into the abyss. The room fell silent, and the house seemed to sigh with relief. The curse had been broken, and the Harrison house was finally at peace. I left the house that night forever changed by the encounter. The memory of the spectral family and their tragic fate haunted my dreams for years to come. And as I walked away, I couldn't help but wonder if there were other cursed souls waiting to be set free. My name is Mike, and I've always been a skeptic when it comes to the supernatural. Ghost stories, haunted houses, and tales of the unexplainable, none of it ever really fazed me. That was until I moved to Hollow Hill. Hollow Hill was a picturesque town nestled in the foothills of the Appalachian Mountains. It seemed like the perfect place to start over, away from the hustle and bustle of the city. I bought an old Victorian-style house on the outskirts of town, a fixer-upper that needed a lot of love. Little did I know that it came with a history that would soon become my nightmare. The house was surrounded by dense woods, and it didn't take long for me to realize that something was off about them. It started with the dogs. Every night, at the stroke of midnight, the dogs in the neighborhood would begin to howl. It was like clockwork, and it sent shivers down my spine. I tried to dismiss it as a coincidence, but the howling became more and more unsettling. It was as if the dogs were communicating with something in those woods. Curiosity got the better of me, and one fateful night, I decided to investigate. I ventured into the woods with a flashlight in hand, the eerie howling guiding my way. The forest was dense, and the air grew colder with every step I took. The trees seemed to close in around me, casting long, sinister shadows. And then, I saw it, a pale figure, hunched over and covered in matted fur, moving among the trees. It was no ordinary creature, it was something otherworldly, something that defied logic and reason. My heart raced as I watched it disappear into the darkness. I rushed back to my house, my mind reeling with fear and confusion. What had I just witnessed? Was it a trick of the light, a figment of my imagination? I couldn't be sure. The next day, I couldn't shake the feeling of dread that had settled over me. I decided to do some research on Hollow Hill's history, hoping to find answers. That's when I stumbled upon an old legend, a legend about a spectral hound that roamed the woods, a harbinger of death. According to the legend, the hound was said to appear when tragedy was about to strike the town. It was a foreboding omen, a ghostly guardian of the hill. I scoffed at the idea, dismissing it as nothing more than folklore. But the howling continued, night after night, growing louder and more mournful. It was as if the hound was trying to tell me something I couldn't quite grasp. I couldn't ignore it any longer. Desperation drove me back into the woods, this time armed with a camera to capture evidence of the spectral hound. As I ventured deeper into the forest, the temperature plummeted, and an unnatural chill filled the air. And then, I saw it again, the hound. Its eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. It was different this time, though. It didn't run from me, it approached me, its gaze filled with an eerie intelligence. I snapped a photo, and the hound let out a mournful howl that sent shivers down my spine. It circled me, and I could feel its cold breath on my skin. I knew then that it was trying to communicate with me, trying to convey a message. I returned home, my heart pounding, and examined the photo I had taken. In the background, I saw something that chilled me to the bone, a faint, shadowy figure lurking among the trees. It was as if the hound was not alone, as if it was part of something much darker. I couldn't sleep at night, haunted by the image of the spectral hound and the shadowy figure in the woods. I knew I had to uncover the truth, to unravel the mystery that had consumed me. Over the next few weeks, I delved deeper into the town's history, uncovering dark secrets and long-forgotten legends. I learned of a tragedy that had befallen Hollow Hill decades ago, a tragedy that had left the town scarred and haunted. As I pieced together the pieces of the puzzle, I realized that the hound was not a harbinger of death but a guardian, a protector of the town. It was trying to warn me, trying to show me the darkness that lurked in the shadows. Armed with this newfound knowledge, I ventured into the woods one final time, determined to confront the shadowy figure and put an end to the howling. The forest was silent, and an oppressive stillness hung in the air. And then, I saw it! The shadowy figure, lurking among the trees. It was a malevolent presence, a darkness that threatened to consume everything in its path. But I was not alone this time. The spectral hound stood by my side, its eyes burning with an otherworldly fire. With a newfound sense of courage, I confronted the shadowy figure, demanding that it leave Hollow Hill and never return. It hissed and recoiled, retreating into the depths of the forest, never to be seen again. As the darkness lifted, the howling of the dogs ceased, and a sense of peace settled over Hollow Hill. The spectral hound had fulfilled its duty, protecting the town from the malevolent force that had plagued it for so long. I returned to my house, forever changed by my encounter with the paranormal. I had witnessed things that defied explanation, things that challenged my beliefs and shook me to my core. And as I lay in bed, listening to the now silent night, I couldn't help but wonder if there were other mysteries lurking in the darkness, waiting to be uncovered. My name is Gina, and I've always been drawn to the mysterious and the unexplained. So, when I stumbled upon a quaint, isolated town named Whispering Pines, I couldn't resist the allure of its eerie reputation. The town was nestled deep within a dense forest, shrouded in perpetual mist. It was the kind of place that sent shivers down your spine, even in broad daylight. The locals were friendly but reserved, and they warned me of the strange occurrences that plagued the town. One evening, as I was sipping coffee at a local diner, an elderly man named Mr. Jenkins struck up a conversation with me. He spoke of the whispers that echoed through the mist, voices that no one could ever quite make out. It was a story that had been passed down through generations, and it sent chills down my spine. Intrigued, I decided to rent a cabin in Whispering Pines, determined to uncover the truth behind the whispers. The forest surrounding the town was enchanting but foreboding, and the mist hung heavy in the air, making it nearly impossible to see beyond a few feet. It wasn't long before I experienced the whispers for myself. One evening, as I was taking a solitary walk through the woods, I heard them, a soft, haunting murmur that seemed to emanate from all directions. The words were indistinct, like a language I couldn't quite grasp. I followed the sound, my heart pounding, until I stumbled upon an ancient, overgrown cemetery. The whispers grew louder, and I realized they were coming from the weathered tombstones that dotted the graveyard. I reached out and touched one of the gravestones, and the whispers grew more pronounced, as if the very earth beneath me was trying to communicate. I strained to understand the words, and then it hit me, they were names of the deceased. The voices seemed to be trying to tell their stories, to share their memories with the living. It was both beautiful and heart-wrenching, and I couldn't help but feel a deep connection to these lost souls. Over the next few weeks, I delved deeper into the mysteries of Whispering Pines. I learned of the town's tragic history, of a terrible accident that had claimed the lives of many residents. It was a dark secret that the town had buried, and the whispers in the mist were the voices of those who had perished. Determined to help these restless spirits find peace, I began documenting their stories. I spent hours in the cemetery, listening to their tales and offering my condolences. It was a lonely and eerie task, but I couldn't abandon them. As I delved deeper into the mysteries of the town, I realized that the whispers were not the only strange occurrence in Whispering Pines. There were sightings of shadowy figures in the mist, strange symbols carved into trees, and inexplicable phenomena that defied explanation. One evening, as I was researching the town's history in the local library, I stumbled upon an old journal belonging to a resident from the past. The journal spoke of a ritual meant to appease the spirits of the mist. I was filled with a sense of dread as I read the details of the ritual. It required a sacrifice, a living sacrifice, to keep the spirits at bay. It was a horrifying revelation, and I knew I had to put an end to it. Armed with my newfound knowledge, I confronted the town's elders, demanding that they cease the ritual and let the spirits find peace. They were hesitant at first, but the evidence was undeniable, and they agreed to my plea. As the mist cleared and the whispers grew fainter, the town of Whispering Pines began to change. The shadows that had haunted the town retreated, and the symbols carved into the trees faded away. It was as if the town itself was finally finding peace. I left Whispering Pines, knowing that I had helped the lost souls find their rest. It was a bittersweet farewell, for I had grown to love the town and its haunted history. But I knew that the whispers and the mist would no longer haunt its residents. As I drove away, the mist slowly enveloped the town once more, and I couldn't help but wonder if it was a final farewell from the spirits of Whispering Pines, a silent, thank you for setting them free. It was just another ordinary Friday night, and I, Jake, the pizza delivery guy, was clocking in for my shift at Giovanni's Pizzeria. The pungent smell of pizza dough and simmering tomato sauce enveloped me as I made my way to the counter. The night was eerily quiet, with only a few sporadic orders coming in. By 11 p.m., I was already bored out of my mind. But little did I know this was going to be a night that would haunt me for the rest of my life. Around midnight, the phone rang. I picked it up and heard a raspy voice on the other end. "I want a large pepperoni pizza, extra cheese, delivered to 13 Hemlock Street," the voice whispered, sending shivers down my spine. Hemlock Street was infamous in our small town for its abandoned houses and eerie ambience. Nobody dared to venture there, especially not at this hour. But the promise of a hefty tip convinced me to take the order. Besides, I was feeling adventurous. I prepared the pizza, extra cheese and all, and set off in my rusty car towards Hemlock Street. The night was moonless, the road cloaked in darkness. The only light came from the dim glow of my car's headlights. When I reached Hemlock Street, I couldn't help but feel a chill in the air. The houses were dilapidated, their windows shattered, and their doors hanging askew. The entire place looked like it had been abandoned for decades. I parked in front of number 13, a decaying mansion that seemed to have seen better days. The porch was sagging, and the windows were covered with grime and dust. I hesitated for a moment, contemplating whether to go through with this delivery or not. But the promise of that tip spurred me on. I grabbed the pizza box and rang the doorbell. The sound echoed through the night like a funeral bell. Seconds felt like hours as I waited for someone to answer. Just when I was about to turn and leave, the door creaked open, revealing a tall, gaunt man in his 40s, his eyes hidden beneath a hood. I could barely see his face, but his voice was the same raspy one from the phone call. "You have the pizza?" I nodded, my nerves on edge. "That'll be $20. He handed me a crumpled $20 bill, which I hastily pocketed. Without another word, he took the pizza box and retreated into the darkness of his home. Relieved to be done with this bizarre delivery, I turned to leave. But then, I heard a faint, mournful sound coming from inside the house, like the soft crying of a child. My curiosity got the better of me. I couldn't help but wonder if everything was okay inside. I approached the door and knocked gently. "Is everything all right in there?" I called out. The crying grew louder, more desperate. I pushed the door open a little wider and called out again, "Sir, is there a child in there?" Without warning, the man rushed back to the door, his hood falling back to reveal his face, a face that was pale as death, his eyes sunken, and his lips curled into a sinister grin. "Get out," he hissed, his voice dripping with malice. I stumbled back in fear, my heart racing. I could hear the crying more clearly now, and it was definitely coming from inside the house. Before I could react, the man slammed the door shut, and I heard the unmistakable sound of multiple locks clicking into place. Panic coursed through my veins as I realized I was trapped inside this forsaken place. I banged on the door, shouting for him to let me out, but it was futile. He had no intention of releasing me. That's when I noticed the eerie paintings on the walls, disturbing images of children in torment, their faces twisted in agony. My mind raced as I searched for an escape route. I noticed a window in the living room, its glass long shattered. I made a dash for it, ignoring the jagged shards that cut my hands as I climbed through. I found myself in the overgrown backyard, my heart pounding as I ran towards my car. I glanced back at the house and saw the man standing in the window, watching me with those malevolent eyes. I sped away from Hemlock Street, vowing never to return. That night, I quit my job at Giovanni's Pizzeria and moved to another town. But I can't forget the chilling sound of that crying child or the sinister grin of the man in that decaying mansion. Sometimes, in my nightmares, I still hear that raspy voice whispering, "I want a large pepperoni pizza, extra cheese." And I can't help but wonder about the dark secret hidden behind the doors of 13 Hemlock Street.